Hello, I'm Sekou Biddle, Vice President of Advocacy and Student Professional Development Programs at UNCF. Today, I'm excited to share with you our unwavering commitment to K-12 education and our pursuit of equity in learning. Thank you for joining us for our new virtual learning series. We hope you find it exciting and innovative, and most important, empowering you to make a difference in the K-12 system in the United States. I want to shine a spotlight on something that's also close to our hearts: increasing diversity among educators, both at the K-12 and academic levels. At UNCF, we fully grasp the game-changing impact a diverse teaching workforce has on guiding students of color, not just to, but through college. Studies consistently highlight the indispensable role Black teachers play in boosting the educational and academic success of all students, putting a special focus on our Black children. It's not just about teaching, it's about mentorship, understanding, and shared experiences. Our K-12 advocacy team is on a mission. We're here to arm educators, administrators, and parents with cutting-edge, research-backed insights and best practices. We're tackling this crucial need head-on, bridging the gap at both the college and K-12 levels. And it doesn't stop there. UNCF is actively building community partnerships with K-12 school districts and HBCUs to create opportunities and pathways for success. Together, let's build a future where every student, no matter his or her background, has a teacher who not only educates, but inspires. That's the UNCF way, and we're completely committed to making it a reality.
Good day, everyone. I know some of us are spread across the country, so maybe good morning or good afternoon, depending on which time zone you're in. My name is Sekou Biddle, and I'm here today to moderate our conversation. Thank you all for joining us. And thank our illustrious guests for joining us and sharing their expertise, their time, and their talent as well. The purpose of today's session is to uplift the significant role of Black parents and teachers play in the success of supporting students' lives. We're going to highlight findings from a forthcoming national study of the specific role Black parents and teachers play in students' work. We're going to highlight findings from our work, and we're going to talk about perspectives and learnings from Black parents, especially pertaining to the role of Black teachers in supporting the students' academic success. We're going to allow our participants and attendees to hear and learn from researchers, practitioners, school leaders, and parent advocates on ways to uplift parent voices and advocate for an equitable education system. To get the ball rolling, I'm going to hand things off to my colleague, Dr. Meredith Anderson.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sekou. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll go ahead and get started. Here we go. So like Sekou said, my name is Dr. Meredith Anderson. I'm the Director of K-12 Research at UNCF, and I'm going to be talking about our forthcoming study, Hear Us, Believe Us, Centering African-American Parent Voices in K-12 Education. So just as a brief overview, we'll start with talking about the overview of K-12 education, followed by the need for Black teachers, a little bit about the study overview, and then a high-level review of the selected findings. And while the report is robust in terms of findings related to perspectives of African Americans on a variety of key issues, we will talk about the findings related to African Americans for this particular presentation, as well as discuss the findings related to the recommendations related to those key findings. So this is a brief overview. Sekou talks in his video about UNCF and our studies, but I wanted to go over it briefly. So while UNCF is celebrating our 80th anniversary in April, our K-12 advocacy team started in 2012. And for the past decade, a little over a decade or so, we've been engaging in community engagement work with our local communities, with our member institutions, but then also providing college access work to make sure that we're uplifting college readiness. As he mentioned, we have been doing our messaging and research where we're uplifting the importance of African-American perspectives on K-12 education, as well as amplifying the voices and contributors of key education issues. We also are engaged in human capital, which is essentially ensuring that we are uplifting the importance of teacher diversity. We are building pipelines between public schools and traditional districts to HBCUs. We have a fellowship program that's operated for over 15 years. And then lastly, we've been engaging in HBCU K-12 partnerships. So developing these meaningful partnerships and interventions between the K-12 communities and HBCU leaders. So to get us started, I'll turn over to talking a little bit about our messaging and research. And so in 2012, we started this work with a report entitled Done to Us, Not With Us, African-American Parent Perceptions of K-12 Education. And the top row of this presentation shows our African-American Perception Research Series, because we know it's important that we're grounding our work in the voices of the community. Find at uncf.org. And so within this work, what we know to be true is that, excuse me, African-American students and parents overwhelmingly want to attend college. They agree that it's important to attend college. Our report we released back in 2018 showed that close to 90% of students said they wanted to attend college. The parents as well, the same, upwards to 90%. But what we have found that, as you may know, is that there are barriers to that goal. So we know, and I won't read all the statistics here on the page, but we know that African-American students are 15% of the total enrollment for public students, but 33% of students expelled without educational services. 45% attend high poverty schools. African-American students are less likely to be enrolled in rigorous AP dual credit courses. And we know that another opportunity gap for our students is that there are a dearth of Black teachers, right? So we've been talking about this throughout the entire series. Only 7% of public school teachers are Black compared to 79% of white teachers. But we know from decades of research dating back to the 1980s that Black teachers matter, and they're making a difference in the lives of students, and not just the lives of our Black students, but for all students overall. And so this report will talk about parents' perspectives when it comes to Black teachers. And so you can kind of think about either put it in the chat or just reflect on yourself. And what grade, if any, did you have your first Black teacher? And what was that experience like? Please feel free to share in the Whova app or on YouTube Live some of your responses. So, and getting back to the session, so the forthcoming report really illuminates the perspective of African-American parents and caregivers on key issues in education related to race, college readiness, parental engagement, and more. And this is a national sample of 500 low to moderate income African-American parents and caregivers of school-age children. We also had a subset of parents that we surveyed in 6 cities that we've been engaged in. We also engaged in focus groups with Black parents. And some of the methods that we employed was using descriptive statistics as well as logistic regression modeling as well. And I'm looking at some of the comments coming in the chat in terms of when people had their first Black teacher, some 10th grade, some 2nd grade, kindergarten, some 5th grade. And so I know it varies for some it didn't even range until college when you had their first Black professor or teacher. So keep those chats coming and we'll be sure to read those. And so getting into some of the key findings of the study. So like we saw in our first report, overwhelming majority of Black parents say it's important for their children to attend college, 84%. 57% said it was extremely important. But if we look at schools with predominantly Black teachers, where parents are sending their children to schools with predominantly Black teachers, 71% of Black parents indicated that college was extremely important, compared to 53% for parents whose children attend schools with few to no Black teachers. And we know that the research shows that, Black students who have had just one teacher by 3rd grade are more likely to enroll in college. We also saw from the presentation yesterday from Donors Choose is that we know that something is occurring with these Black teachers, that they're having an impact, either via direct impact with the students spending that time after school, or it's also just the role model effect that their presence is having, but we know it's having an impact. We also know that the logistic models also shows that the probability that a Black parent views college as important for their child was higher if their child attended schools with many or most Black teachers. So again, having a Black teacher not only elevates parents' aspirations, but it's important for our students that they know that they can go to college when there are more Black teachers in the classroom. And just thinking about this, and you can also put this in the chat or think to yourself, did your Black teacher or teachers influence your aspirations for college, either directly or indirectly? Share with us, how did that happen? How did they talk to you about your experience, or was it their presence elevated your thoughts to go to college? And so thinking about not only are Black teachers important, we know that having Black leaders are important. So we asked Black parents, would education efforts, improvement efforts be more significant, more effective if there were more leaders involved? And we see that 70% said yes, that would be more effective. And so Black leaders, we know, amplify these issues of inequities. They help dismantle systemic racism. And we had one parent in the focus group mention, as a parent, I absolutely got my son signed up with the 100 Black Men mentorship. And of course, that guided him. But we also know that African-American parent engagement in education is high. So we hear deficit narratives often talking about our Black parents, that they're not engaged, that they don't care about the learning environment from their children. I was reading some open-ended data from some teachers that we collected, and it was disheartening hearing what the teachers were saying about our Black parents, that they don't care. That's why their kids don't go to college. And so what we see is that across the board, that Black parents are engaged. They're checking their children's homework, and they're reading with their children on a daily to weekly basis, about 84%. They're speaking with their child's teacher. They're speaking with their school counselors. But then also thinking about this role of Black teachers. So 51% of Black parents and caregivers said that their school does a pretty good job at making them feel respected. However, this increased by 9 percentage points for Black parents whose children attend school with more Black teachers. So again, that respect level is higher when there are more Black teachers in the school, and Black parents feel that the environment is better in terms of having that respect when there are more Black teachers. And I just want to go back. I see some comments in the chat that, some of the Black teachers, how they're encouraged for college, they help them step up as a leader. They assisted with class assignments. So these teachers are making an effort with students beyond just the teaching. They're raising aspirations and expectations like we've seen in the research before. And so this table essentially is talking about the school environment, and most specifically in terms of discipline. So the study showed that only 36% of parents said their child did a very good job dealing with discipline issues. And so this is something that we see earlier. I pointed out about the Office for Civil Rights data having the deficits as it relates to African-American students being overrepresented in discipline. We see that here as well. But when we asked for Black parents whose children attended schools where many or most of their teachers were Black, the probability that their child received an out-of-school suspension is almost 3 times lower than when their child attended schools with fewer Black teachers. So again, having Black teachers is depressing the percentage of Black students being disciplined. And we see this in the literature that Black teachers are associated with declines in discipline. And so here we're seeing as well that parents are saying the same thing, validating what we've been seeing in some of this data. And just another point here, like I said, we're focusing on the Black teacher discussion, but I do want to point out here that amongst parents of students of 6th grade or higher, only 30% of these parents said that schools were doing a very good job in providing information about how to apply and pay for college. So while aspirations are high, while we see the importance of college from our Black parents and our Black teachers are elevating this, we know that parents still want more when it comes to going to college and those resources. And so at UNCF, we've been trying to fill that gap, but we know that that's a gap that still exists. And then in terms of advocacy, so in the report, we talk about how parents don't want to be passive bystanders in the learning process for their children. They don't want education being done to them. So 90% of parents said it would be helpful if they had resources that would help them in their advocacy efforts. 93% said they would like more opportunities to be involved in their child's education and more input into education laws. And we have Maya Martin Cadogan, who will talk a little bit more about PAVE's work in doing this in the panel after the session or after the presentation. But then also we know that parents has perspectives on what can help elevate the learning environment. 91% believe that expanding social services for students would have a positive effect on students. And parents would also like teachers to be paid more. One of the parents, in thinking about this advocacy too, they said, when I came into the school system, I knew right away that I had to be an advocate. And what we heard in the focus groups is that parents wanted to be partners. They didn't want to be bystanders. They wanted to make sure that they are involved in the learning environment of their children. And so kind of think about to yourself, how can communities, parents, caregivers, or other advocate for more Black teachers? And we'll talk about this when we get into the panel discussion. So in terms of the call to action, in lieu of time, I'll just go over, these are the recommendations. The report will be forthcoming in the next month or so. But for the purposes of this presentation, I want to highlight the findings or the recommendations related to Black teachers, both on the K-12 side and the higher education side. So when thinking about teacher diversity, the first recommendation is invest unapologetically in Black teachers. So partnering with universities to establish grow your own programs, local grow your own programs that with a focus on diverse talent. Really focusing on retention and not just recruitment of teachers of color. And then also in examining these invisible taxes that we place on Black teachers. If you think about Black History Month, is the Black teacher the only one, holding up the Black History Month program? Or are they the only person dealing with discipline? Thinking about what are some of the ways that our Black teachers are assigned to additional tasks and not being compensated for that. Thinking about providing mentorship opportunities with financial incentives, but then also expanding recruitment networks and creating partnerships with HBCUs and nonprofits like the Center for Black Educator Development and UNCF, like we discussed. But then also, as we'll talk about in the panel, mobilizing Black parents and caregivers to advocate for greater diversity, because we know that the voices of Black parents matter in this role, in this work. And lastly, thinking about the recommendations for higher education. So it's important that we think about how can we create these partnerships, intentional pipelines with districts and charter management organizations to increase educator diversity. And so there's some examples that we've seen in New Orleans, for example, with the Norman T. Francis Teacher Residency Program, the Claflin's Mr. Program, but then also thinking about partnering with local donors to create scholarship opportunities for local area schools. If you want to learn a little bit more about our HBCU K-12 partnership work, put the link at the bottom, uncf.org/HBCU K-12. And then also this right column kind of talks about what we heard from parents and how they wanted more information related to college. And so how can colleges and organizations reach more to the schools to provide them with those resources? And again, thinking about these virtual and in-person college tours, the partnerships with our universities and our HBCUs, but then also thinking about how can universities create these structured ambassador programs to help K-12 students glean insight from current college students. At UNCF, we have an ambassador program, and these students go back to their communities and talk about the importance of K-12 education. They provide the resources. And so having someone that looks like them, having someone that's closer in age, while that's important that they could hear from people like myself and others, I think they would more likely, and we heard from the data, they more likely want to hear from college students. And so with that, like I said, some of the recommendations, we will delve deeper in the report, and we'll be sure to send that when it's released next month. But I wanted to go ahead and turn it over to Sekou Biddle and introduce the rest of our panelists.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Anderson. I'd like to take a minute to get today's conversation going. The first thing I'd like to do is just let you all know what we're going to do. So I'm going to moderate the panel conversation with our panelists, and I'm going to do that for about 28-ish minutes. And then we're going to hand it over to questions that the attendees are putting in the chat, and we'll walk through some of the questions that our attendees have for our panelists. So if you've got questions that come up, thoughts you have during the conversation, please put them in the chat, and we'll get as many of them to our panelists in about 27 minutes. So with that said, I would love to take an opportunity to have our panelists introduce themselves to everyone. So I'll just simply call on you. If you just give us your quickest introduction, we'll move things along here. So Maya, I'd like for you to go first.
Thank you. And thank you to Dr. Anderson for sharing that critical research. And thank you, Sekou, and to the entire UNCF team for having me here today. I just wanted to share again, my name is Maya Martin-Cadogan. I'm the founder and executive director of PAVE, which in the wonderful world of DC acronyms stands for Parents Amplifying Voices in Education. We do work here in the District of Columbia, our nation's capital, to bring parent voices to our education policy making system. And so our parents have worked on a number of issues around school-based mental health, out of school time programs, school budgets, making sure that we have equitable funding for students. And the majority of our parents are African-American, and many are from Wards 7 and 8, which is east of the Anacostia River, which is a big dividing line here in DC. I just, really thank you guys all for having us and for lifting up this important conversation about the perceptions of Black parents. I think one of the things that we've really seen here at PAVE is that it mirrors what Meredith shared in her work about that Black parents really are engaged, right? Our parents, we have 3,500 parents across the district, and of those, about 200 parents are actually working actively, meaning that they are testifying before the DC Council, in addition to being engaged with their local school communities to make our education system better, talking to our mayor, attending her budget forum. So I think the data that Meredith shows is really backed up in what we've seen from parents. Even when they have jobs and other commitments, Black parents are committed to making our education system stronger, and they really are thinking about the long-term trajectory of where our kids are going.
Thanks for that, Maya. And for introduction, I'd love to hand the mic to Dr. Gilchrist.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here. So I come to this work as a developmental psychologist and expert in teacher diversity, a former education advocate, current education advocate, and the lead researcher of two pivotal reports that came out of the Education Trust, one in 2015 on Through Our Eyes, and the other one, I believe in 2019, we put out right before I switched roles, which was called If You Listen, We Will Stay, all around Black teachers, Latino teachers, and their roles and how we understand both recruitment and retention of Black educators. And now I have the tremendous privilege of serving as an assistant professor and program coordinator at the first HBCU in the state of Maryland, Bowie State University. And so shout out to Bowie State. I've transitioned from a researcher, scholar, and advocate thinking about Black educators to a Black educator myself. And so it has transitioned much of my thinking, but also supported a good deal of the research I've been doing along the way. So I'm excited to engage in the conversation.
Thanks for that, Dr. Gilchrist. And speaking of Black educators, I'm going to hand the mic to our colleague, Cameron Frazier. Cameron, introduce yourself to the group.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you to UNCF for the opportunity to be here and for uplifting this conversation. My name is Cameron Frazier. I'm the founder and principal of Becoming Collegiate Academy. We are the first HBCU-inspired elementary school located in Jacksonville, Florida. We serve grades kindergarten through second grade currently, and we're growing a grade level each year till we scale to be a full K-5 elementary school. Excited to be here and excited to talk more about our model and the great things that we're doing at Becoming Collegiate Academy. Thank you.
Thanks, Cameron. And last but not least, I'd like to hand the mic to Dr. Courtney Dogan-Tyson. Ticey, rather.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to join you today. I'm Dr. Courtney Dogan-Tyson. I serve as a senior advisor in the administration, specifically in the U.S. Department of Education, where I support our elementary and secondary education work. Specifically, that focuses on our secretary's initiative, Raise the Bar, where I support a key pillar in ensuring and supporting states and districts and implementing comprehensive and rigorous education for all students, certainly an equity mission within that. And then the second piece and second role for me is as Deputy Director of the White House Initiative for Black Americans, where we're really charged with supporting all things that are related to Black students, families, and communities. Specifically, my focus is in educational equity and really supporting and disseminating resources, ensuring that our community has an awareness of federal resources both in funding and in technical assistance. And then I'll say, as my third role, I moonlight as an adjunct, and I share that because it's been quite important to me to stay in the classroom. So I don't know where the time comes from, but it has been a great joy to support students, to support educators in their process of developing professionally. So I bring all three of those hats with me, and I'm so excited to join this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. So as our audience can see, we've got a great depth and breadth of expertise and experiences here. So to get the ball rolling, and I'm going to ask Dr. Gilchrist to be the first person to chime in our question, and I'd love to have our other panelists chime in after that, however they feel comfortable. So Dr. Anderson talked earlier about there are some myths and misconceptions, incorrect narratives, and misinformation about sort of engagement of Black parents and families, as well as teachers. I'd love to hear from you, Dr. Gilchrist. Like, what is it that you know from your experience, your work, your research, that runs counter to some of the popular beliefs people have about, in particular, Black families and Black teachers?
So historically, right, we know historically that is just not the case. Historically, what we see, if you look at the work from Vanessa Siddle Walker, The Lost Education of Horace Tate, if you look at the work of Dr. Jarvis Givens, if you look at the work of Michelle Foster, if you look at the work of right, it goes on and on and on, what you see is a legacy of excellence, brilliance, and genius that needs to be celebrated and cultivated, both among Black teachers and educators. And I'm going to use advocates, social justice warriors, right? We don't have advocacy without Black educators in the space fighting for Black children, not just in the classroom, but in advocacy spaces. And we also don't have Black teachers supported without the communities and parents around them, right? That historically what we know is schools were a place where educators educated and parents and communities came together to support that space, right? The research shows that, the evidence shows that. So that's in the past. What we see in the present is we've seen Black schools thriving with all Black teachers, leaders, right? We talk about the Center for Black Educator Development, but Sharif El-Mekki is a tremendous principal and leader of Mastery Charter Schools and demonstrated success in his 26 years of leadership before he became another leader in an advocacy nonprofit space. And so I'll stop there. I think I could go on and on and on about like the power and brilliance of our community. And just that the fact that I would say is that, like, if you want to see the research, it exists. It is there. If you want to read James Anderson's History of Black Education and see that across every time and every movement, when Black people have excelled, oftentimes policies have been created to undercut and undermine, but that doesn't mean we haven't excelled as parents, teachers, and leaders and educators.
If I could reach my copy of Dr. Anderson's book, it's just out of reach on my shelf. I would hold it up for the audience to see.
Best book ever.
Yeah. Anyone, it is, in fact, I think if you're interested in the history of and the future of education for African Americans in this country, it's definitely an important read. I'd love to hear from other folks who want to talk about what we can be doing or what we know about some of the narratives around Black parents and Black educators.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in. Sekou, I think, it's so interesting being a part of this conversation coming from the District of Columbia that has a long history of excellence around Black educators and continues that today. Many of our school leaders, both of our charter school networks in the district, as well as our DCPS principals, are Black leaders. And many of the folks that they're staffing in their schools are Black educators. And we have a long history of that here. For myself, even speaking to what Dr. Gilchrist was talking about, 3 of my 4 grandparents went to Dunbar High School in the early 1950s. One of my grandmothers was actually sent from New York City to attend Dunbar here in the District of Columbia because it was considered one of the best high schools for African American students in the country that sent most of its children on to college and careers that allowed us to really excel. And so I think it's, one of the things we have the benefit of is being a part of that legacy. I think what we know is that part of the challenge has been the divestment that we've done in our schools. And so that legacy that my grandparents were a part of was at a time when schools were separate and unequal. And Black families and educators together were navigating that system alone and trying to fight for any version of equity. And yet we still have to do that today, right? So I think one of the things that we see as a challenge, which is why I think these narratives are biased, is because we're not actually investing equitably in our students, especially our Black students, which in DC is synonymous with our low income students, because race and class here are inextricably tied in a rapidly gentrifying city that should be a state. And so I think that's what has a greater impact on what we're talking about when we're talking about the pipeline of Black educators, because people want to be able to live in the city in which they teach and which they work and be a part of that community. That's a legacy that we're a part of as Black people here in this country. And that's not something that we were able to do in the same way because we're not funding our schools in the ways that we should be. Even when we think we're funding them so greatly, it's still nowhere near what a white family in Ward 3 across the river, or across the river from Ward 7 and 8, where many of our parents are, across the park from where most of our Black families are, is spending on a private school education, right? And so I think there really is an inequity in that way. But what we've seen is that Black parents and Black educators are committed. They are doing this work. And they are really trying to figure out how do we make our system more equitable so that those kinds of barriers we can start to remove. But the commitment is there. And when you look at what our Black educators, our Black principals, our Black families are doing, they are committed to our Black liberation.
Thanks for that, Maya. And I actually love to dig in a little bit deeper on the points you're raising about Black educators. And in fact, I'd like to pivot to Dr. Doug Ticey to talk a little bit about the work of the Department of Education and what they're doing programmatically to help increase and support the increased number of Black teachers and support Black teachers out in the field.
Thank you for the question. And I'll just share this. In the introduction, I talked a little bit about the role of the White House Initiative and ensuring or supporting just information sharing, making sure that folks are aware of the grant opportunities, because if there is one thing that I've heard from even my family members, folks who are closest to me, it's that they're not aware of funding opportunities. And it hurts me. It hurts my heart because as a researcher, I think about the different EIR grants that we have available or the teacher incentive grants that are available. And there's a whole contingency of people who are unaware of them, who certainly would not only qualify, would be great panel reviewers and things of that nature. So I'm starting there, but certainly want to answer your question about what the department is doing. Just know that's a plug for us to talk about the funding opportunities that I hope everyone on this call is plugged into. Within the department, we are prioritizing educator diversity and addressing the high need shortage areas. That we know at a very high level. Over the last 2 years, there's been historic funding, really the last 3 years of this administration. But if I start with FY22, we've really focused on several of our grant programs. And I'll just share a couple numbers. They've resulted in 165 awards that total $370 million. 93% of those were grantees that were required to take into account efforts related to educator diversity. And in the following year, we awarded additional 15 grants that probably between $395 million to $450 million. And that went to over 263 grantees to support educator diversity priorities. And then, of course, we launched campaigns because part of our work is certainly in the bully pulpit moments where we can signal what the priorities are of this administration. And I will share both President Biden and the Secretary of Education, Secretary Cardona, have been quite explicit in the message of supporting Black families, students, and educators. And I'll share also this kind of final point when I think about it. Meredith talked about this not only being about teacher recruitment, but also teacher retention. And so as a particular focus in our initiative, we are supporting educator wellness. So you'll see that in our programming, you'll see that in even some of the funding opportunities that we have that are specific to HBCUs, TSUs, or excuse me, TCCUs and MSIs more broadly. I'm sharing that because I think about some of the districts, states and districts who may not have as much support as other districts. And by that, I mean, I think about, I don't want to call out any particular districts, but I think about the power of our national platform to bring community to folks who are in locales that may not have that. And so a key effort of ours has really been to bring Black teachers together by way of wellness events or during teacher appreciation weeks or even Black History Month to ensure that they are front and center and that there is appreciation. So in short, moving from not only the big kind of major funding opportunities that we talk about, I just want to kind of localize it and talk about the heart of it, and also thinking about educator wellness, which again, sometimes at a national level or at a federal level is not what we often talk about, but it's certainly something, again, coming from the heart space that is incredibly important to our work.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And just a reminder to our audience, so we've got about 10 minutes until we start taking Q&A questions from the audience. So if you've got questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat. I'd like to pull Cameron in here to the conversation. And Cameron, as a principal and school founder, how have you worked to ensure that you have a diverse staff that is reflective of your student body? And how do you see that representation show up in interaction with your students and parents?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't have my first African-American teacher until I was in 6th grade. So in starting becoming Collegiate Academy, it was very important for me to staff the school with individuals who look like our students. Our students identify as 100% African-American. We have 100%, our staff identifies as 100% African-American as well. So we're completely reflective of our student body. 50% of our teachers identify as Black males, 50% of our teachers identify as HBCU alum. And there's diversity within that, right? Like Black is not a monolith. So in thinking about these individuals who we put in front of our kids, we're very thoughtful about it. We thought through like age, we wanted diverse, arranging generations. That's like teaching our kids, thinking through origin. A lot of our teachers are from Jacksonville, Florida, from the local community, but like we also need perspectives outside of Jacksonville. So we want individuals who are not just from our local community to impact our students. And in their background, like there are so many different types of like Black people that's out there. And we want those individuals to be able to like impact our students and have to have a profound additional impact on their education. And as a result of that, the impacts, there have been many. A few that I highlight the most is that, one, Black teachers have a cultural understanding and sensitivity when it comes to interacting with Black students and Black families. We see it every day in the interactions with our families. Our families feel safe here. We think about traditionally Black families, you know, there's a myth that Black families are not involved, that Black families don't volunteer. Our families are involved in their children's education. They like come through the threshold and enter our doors every day and volunteer and help out and lend support where they can. But that's because we've created an environment where they can feel safe themselves. Representation matters. And our teachers act as role models for our students, but not only for our students, but for our families as well. I think, Meredith, you said something around like elevating parents' aspirations. Like a lot of our parents' aspirations have elevated just from being in an environment where they see Black educators. Now they have aspirations to go back to school. And they're using a lot of the same language we're using in the school, in the home. So we're seeing it translate. And then the last piece is just like the joy that I see in our kids' faces. I love to see like that Black joy from seeing a Black teacher educate you, especially a Black male. All of our students receive instruction from a Black male as early as kindergarten. That is like so important because like representation matters, and they need you can't be what you can't see. And you know, like we want our kids to see excellence and Black excellence. So thank you.
Hey, Cameron, I really appreciate that. And I especially appreciate the nod to like the importance of joy. Like this is very, very hard, important, intense work, but like we do need to be recognizing that all this work does need to come with some joy, and we need to be focused on injecting more joy into people's lives. Maya, you know, I've had a chance to see a lot of the great work that PAVE has done here in DC, And I'm curious, connecting what you're doing and what Cameron's talking about, like, have you seen parent-led efforts that are, either locally or nationally that are focused on increasing the number of Black educators or representation in the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, I will say one of the things that I think is important that even came out in the work that Dr. Anderson did is that it's also about creating the policy conditions that make it so that our education system is able to staff both in terms of recruitment and retention, as we talked about, Black educators, Black school leaders, and keep Black families, right? I think that's an important, all of these things go together. And so part of what our parent leaders have been doing really is trying to figure out what are the policy priorities that they need to put in place in order to make that possible. So for instance, our mayor just came out with a couple of days ago, a 12.4% increase on our uniform poor student funding formula. A lot of that is going to go to the teacher contract and DCPS for our traditional public schools. And much of that will also similarly be passed along to keeping the pay scale the same for charter teachers in the charter sector. And that's going to go to keeping Black educators in our schools here in DC, right? Given that we have a high number of those here in the district. And so that's one piece, right, is around school funding. Our teachers have worked a lot on, I think in Meredith, Dr. Anderson noted it in her report about support staff. I think educators want to make sure that the whole building is effectively staffed so that they don't have to do all of the roles in the classrooms. Our parents have fought for the school-based mental health expansion here in DC. We've actually fully funded at least one school-based mental health professional in every single school, both charter and DCPS. That is not typical. It doesn't mean they're all recruited, but it's actually important that we have the funding for every single school to have a full-time professional of their choosing. I think that's huge, so that person is able to meet the needs of the students. And we've also talked about educator wellness. We also thought our parents worked on actually removing the barriers to licensing here in the district, because we had a number of teachers who were in PG County, Black teachers in particular, who could not get the reciprocity to come over to the district or even around school-based mental health. So we removed those barriers, because when we're talking about pipeline, you have to think about what are the barriers for the pipeline to be able to doing that work. We've talked about educator housing here in the district, and what does that look like, right? So that middle-class Black residents, many of whom are teachers, can remain living in the district and don't have to move out to far outer ring suburbs. So I think some of this is also about, as we think about what policy solutions look like, trying to figure out how we put the policy solutions in place that allow Black educators and school leaders to thrive. And Black parents our Black parents at PAVE really do prioritize that, because they are thinking about that entire system. Of course, they are talking regularly about the cultural competence of teachers and making sure that we have a number of Black educators. But it's also the second order question of, that's first order, but it's a second order question of how are we making sure we're putting the policy components in place to make that possible from a systematic perspective. And so, a number of the other parent organizations across the country have been thinking similarly. You can look at in the South, Memphis Lift, Atlanta Thrive, right? They're all talking about these. When you look at all of our groups, right? We're all Black led. We're all Black parents ourselves. We're all in this work and from our cities and states. We're all trying to figure out how do you put all those policy conditions in place to make that possible. I think it has to go hand in hand. And I think sometimes we have those conversations absent how does the system have to change to make that long-term legacy something that can be a reality.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Policy, yes. Conditions, I hear you. I think about growing up in DC, having many Black teachers that taught me in school, lived in and around neighborhoods that I still see today. If there's one thing that'll keep a kid on his toes, it's knowing that you might see the teacher, or knowing your parents might see the teacher in the grocery store,
or your grandparent, and they're gonna call they're gonna call them. So
me on my toes, and I'm relatively along the way, and I still see my former teachers in public. Hey, Dr. Griffin, I'd love to hear a little bit about extending Maya's point there. We talked about conditions that will attract and retain Black teachers. Like, you've done research on this. What make teachers stay or leave the classroom?
So I think a lot of the things Maya has already shown or talked about in terms of we need to support them across these policy intersections, right? And so culturally affirming environment. So we need curriculum supports and policy that support curriculum that allow them to be their fullest selves and not attack who they are when they come into buildings. We need to fix our narrative about the spaces where they work, right? And so we hear Black teachers oftentimes say, like, while children see themselves as a reflection, right, of their teachers, teachers are also seeing themselves as a reflection of their students. So as we show up and we have these anti-Black genius narratives in school spaces, right? You hear Cameron say like the joy that we have in this school and the way parents see themselves, the way we see ourselves in this space, that is a part of this, right? So as you think about policies about wellness, we might think about social emotional learning policies for adults. That transition, your Castle has a transformative policy. Rob Jagers and I talk about what does it mean to be politically conscious, right? Well, that transcends. That's about leaders. That's about teachers. That helps the space that sustains me and builds me in the space that might oftentimes be difficult. And so we want to have those things and making it a priority, right? So retaining me is a priority, helping me have policies around my housing, my student loan forgiveness, supports in the building to help do the work, professional development support. So while we want Black educators in buildings, we want them to be content strong. We want them to be pedagogically strong. And so while the Black teaching tradition is about racial identity, belonging, critical engagement, like everybody's not gonna come to deck with that. And that requires some support and building. And then last, we need leaders, not administrators, but leaders. So as we support policies around what we need to do for teachers, we need policies in place that also support the development of strong leaders in buildings. Because what happens with Black educators and some of what's happening in terms of who's in the building, do we fight for a social worker? Do we fight for more funding? Do we go after the funding? Well, that's coming through a leader, right? And so some of this is around how do we think about what leaders look like, because where Black teachers are thriving and staying beyond their call is where they are supported by a strong leader with strong vision who can allow them to be who they want to be. You know, I heard Cameron say, like, we think about diversity, we think about how they show up in the space, we think about that thought isn't happening across all leaders because all leaders aren't leaders, they're administrators. And that's okay if that's what you want, but that's not what's going to keep Black teachers in that space. And so it's a lot of pieces to the pie, but I think all of those things are critical to keeping Black teachers and helping them find a space where they can thrive and be retained.
Thank you for that, Dr. Griffin. I appreciate your push on like we need to lead and leaders lead and create those conditions. I think that's helpful for us to reflect on. Like the conditions are created by policy, they're created by leaders, they're created by other things that make it more hospitable and possible for teachers to choose the profession, stay in it, and thrive. I see we've got.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, just quite quickly, because Dr. Gilchrist, I really like that connection. And I think one of the ways we're thinking about it at the department is making sure that the pipeline doesn't stop when you're in service, right? So you talked about teachers seeing or being, their students being a reflection of them. And the same thing with administrators, right? Or leaders, that being a reflection. And I think what we're seeing and how we want to invest in supports is that not stopping again at in-service, but thinking about, does the pipeline continue to them being administrators, to them being superintendents, and how are we supporting our Black state leaders?
I appreciate that greatly. I also appreciate, full disclosure, that I can sit here and talk to this group of panelists and pepper them with questions all day long, but that wasn't the agreement. I told them I only need them for an hour, and I told the audience that we'd get to their questions. So now it is in fact time for the audience questions. I'm going to go to one I see here in the chat. How can we ensure that parents' voices are centered in K-12 wellness initiatives and support for uniquely abled families, particularly when they face barriers to accessing free and public education? Who'd like to chime in on that?
I'll take a stab at that. I think one thing we need to ensure is that we're actually not being performative when we're asking to hear from parents, and that we're truly hearing them and believing them. You know, I titled this report "Hear Us, Believe Us" because it's easy to hear, like you said, and ensuring that we're centering those voices. But if we believe them, we'll surely center those voices and making sure that they're part of those wellness activities. And I think, you know, meeting parents where they are. So if there are initiatives that you need to maybe meet outside of school hours, you know, I know a school principal that she meets parents where they are. It might not be easy all the time to provide that after school care service, if you have an initiative, or if you're providing food. But some of those things, we know parents, I myself as a working parent, sometimes it's hard. And so meeting parents where they are in these instances, and then also advocating at the district level to ensure that the district is providing those funds and services so schools can provide those resources as well, I think is a key piece.
Can I add something here, Sekou?
Please.
I'm looking at she's in the middle of my screen. And I just want to say that in the research, we hear conversations about parent engagement and critical engagement. And so there's a space around where you think you may need to, as a parent, provide support around homework help and those kinds of things. And that's true. But where I think PAVE and Maya's group and other groups like PAVE are so important, and getting involved in them is so important, is that they are doing critical engagement. And so there is the showing up at the school board meeting, and the showing up at the city council meeting, and the showing up at the school PTA meeting, and that critical engagement and figuring that out, especially in a virtual world where meetings are oftentimes moved but held online, held online. Being in those rooms and getting involved in those organizations is one of the ways you can ensure that maybe there is a push toward wellness initiatives in your district or in a district, because there are groups organized to do that in that critical engagement moment.
Yeah, as a follow-up, just a good example of that is that our parents worked on out-of-school time program expansion here in the district. So quadrupled the funding we had as a city for summer programs, after school programs. And one of the things a group of our parents who had children with special needs actually fought for was making sure that the seats that were offered in out of school time programs were equitably distributed to parents of children with special needs, because many times providers were saying they didn't have like some of the staffing needs in terms of, one-on-ones or those types of things to be able to support those students. So we put extra funding and support and pieces around making sure that those seats were equitably distributed. And these are all Black parents, right, who are fighting for that. Even inside of Blackness, there are things that, are different about all of our identities, and we have to make sure that all of those voices are represented.
Yeah. Thank you very much for all those points. I think that there's a lot that needs to be done, and certainly I think what Dr. Gilchrist and Meyer are saying about, we need to get serious about providing children and families the things they need. And, what to Meredith's point about, if we believe what families are saying, we have to demonstrate that belief with action, not with a nod of the head, like, oh, yes, I hear you and I believe you, but we're not going to fund or create policy conditions to make it available and possible. We have to actually deliver against those things. Got another question here in the chat. Any thoughts on, are there national organizations for guidance counselors or advisors?
Yeah, so the American School Counselor Association is a group of school counselors, and I would say it as well. They're also a group that needs more representation of Black counselors. We present at that conference. We presented a couple of times, and when we come and talk about equitable college choice options like HBCUs and making sure you're talking to your students about that and your families, we often hear, we don't have the resources, we don't know where to find this information, et cetera. And so I think that would be a good resource to look into. Again, that just like we need more Black teachers, we also need increases in Black counselors.
Yeah. Other thoughts on that? Got a question here about asking for advice for helping parents and support and advocate for their students who are being educated within systems that have minimal Black or other minority students.
I'm happy to take it from a governmental angle. Earlier I talked about information dissemination being like one of the biggest challenges here. There are grants that specifically state that stakeholder engagement is required, parent engagement is required. I'm sharing that because, sometimes states don't advertise that piece. Sometimes there's not an all call. So you have certain parents or certain parent groups that then are the ones who are commenting, making funding decisions on things that are supposed to be widely known by all parents. And so, to answer your question and also to kind of piggyback on the last question, it's really, making sure And this is on the government too, right? Making sure that you're aware of funding opportunities, the nuances within them, opportunities to be peer reviewers. So you are also in the process deciding where the funding is going, and advocating again from an information asset-based place, knowing how to follow the money. And so I will tell you, one of the things that we're developing with our lead parent liaison is how do we ensure that parents know how to follow the money from the federal level? Because people are not feeling it at the district. We're giving historic amounts of money, but when we talk to folks at the district, parents at the district, they're like, oh, I didn't know that I should be included in that. Well, some parents are included, so why are other parents not aware of these opportunities? So I'll just stop it there, but look forward to kind of continuing the conversation and thinking about ways that that information would be most impactful. Maya, I'm looking at you and others on this call. So hoping that we can maybe thought partner strategize together.
Yeah, Dr. Dicey, one of the things I hear you saying is like, we do need to think about how do we support families and communities in one, following the money, but two, like advocating and being actively engaged in the policy making and oversight processes, state, local, and federal. All those things are supposed to be aligned to supporting the best, the needs of students. And we need to make sure that parents and other stakeholders understand where their opportunities to weigh in are, that their voices are in fact being heard. Because to your point, somebody's voice is being heard, and the voices that are being heard are influencing the choices that are being made. And so we need to make sure that perhaps a more diverse set of parents and stakeholders' voices are being heard in all of those places. We're actually getting up against time here, so I'd love to pivot. I think Dr. Anderson is going to share back up on the screen some information about the report. And I'm going to ask folks to give us a parting thought or call to action on the way out. So why don't we start with Maya, if you wouldn't mind, give us any parting thought, call to action for our attendees today.
Sure. I'll piggyback off of the last comment and just say, we as Black people come from a beautiful tradition of organizing, even when we had nothing and we were shut out of systems all the time, when we didn't have the wonderful people in the Department of Education like Dr. Dicey fighting for us. We organized to figure out our way together. And so I would argue that to do that work around advocacy, the first step we have to do is find us, even if we are in environments where there aren't many of us, and organize together so that we're not having to navigate this alone, but that rather, because even when there aren't many of us, there are 5 of us, and 5 of us can do a whole heck of a lot. And we've seen that in the history of our people. And so, and even if we're in a school with a lot of us, you find the 5 of us that are ready to do the work around this. But I think that is like the tradition we come out of at PAVE. And when you do it, you can do it both to strengthen the system and to make sure it's centered in joy, because the reason that we're doing all this is because of the love we have for our kids, and it needs to be something that we fight hard, but we love hard as Black people, and that we're doing that centered in us.
Love it. Dr. Gilchrist, any parting thoughts?
A short one. So I'm not sure who raised this question. It wasn't me. I'm stealing it. But I would like to say, as we frame our conversation or fight around teachers or parents and Black folks in particular, that we frame our policy fights around this, given the structural impediments that we face, why do Black people do so well, right? And so if we can approach questions with that framing, we are winning, right? If we know why we do well is because we need certain things in place, and we fight for those things. We don't need to fight from what people just don't give us. Let's fight from what we know makes us excellent and sit in that space. So I'll say it one more time. Given we have so many impediments, why do Black people do so well? Why is there so much excellence? And then the last piece is just a shout out to folks at Bowie State, folks looking for Black male teachers or Black male supporters. Dr. Julius Davis here does tremendous work, and he has a Black male teachers college here for 8th graders who are interested in this teaching pipeline. He has a Black male teacher initiative consortium with a bunch of folks in the state of Maryland working on this issue. And then the Black Teacher Collaborative is also doing tremendous work to support Black educators around the country. And so just want to make sure those are some folks you may not know about, but are doing tremendous work to support them.
Thanks for that, Dr. Gilchrist. Cameron, closing thoughts?
Just there's power in community. So I just send a call out to everyone, Black business leaders, Black, like just Blacks in all different spaces to know that like we need you in our schools, our kids need you, we need to see you, and we want you. And a call to all Black male educators, all Black males who are interested in education, like our kids need you, we need you. Like please, like join this fight, because we are the ones who are going to like course correct for our kids. It's on us, and we can do it. So thank you for the opportunity.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. In our final minute, Dr. Adogun-Tyce, closing thought?
I'll simply say, follow the money. There have been historic investments. If you don't see it in your community, please ask the questions. What is happening with my Bipartisan Safer Communities Act funds if I'm looking for how we are supposed to be supporting student wellness, and I am a parent and should have been engaged in the stakeholder process? So follow the money and please ask questions.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Anderson.
Yes, I just want to chime in. I'd be remiss if we have school counselors and teachers that I would not also lift up following the money that we offer and other institutions offer for college. And so if you just scan the QR code that's on the screen, that'll take you to our link tree that has various resources. And I would just say, when we're talking about our Black parents, that we, again, are believing them and we're not just hearing them.
And I would be remiss if on today of all days, as we're talking about Black parents, and as Maya talked about organizing young people, if I did not shout out my mother, Freddie Green Biddle, whose birthday is today. If you want to learn more about her and the great work she did as an organizer with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, check out the SNCC Legacy Project online. And with that, I want to thank our illustrious guests and panelists. Thank everybody for joining us today for lunch. Hopefully you learned something new. Please follow up and check out our resources online, the QR code. And if we can help you in any way, please let us know. Thank you all very much, everybody. Please have a good afternoon and rest of your day.